The Galactic Council chamber buzzed with the usual mixture of diplomatic tension and barely concealed contempt that had become standard since humanity's forced integration into the intergalactic community. Ambassador Sarah Chun sat rigid in the human delegation's designated area, her dark eyes scanning the assembled representatives of 47 different species. The air recycling system struggled to accommodate the diverse atmospheric needs, creating an unpleasant cocktail of scents that reminded her why she preferred Earth's simple oxygen-nitrogen mixture. Across the semicircular chamber, the Zephyrian delegation occupied their elevated platform with characteristic arrogance. Their crystalline bodies caught and refracted the chamber's artificial lighting, creating prismatic displays that might have been beautiful if Sarah didn't know the cruelty that lurked behind their translucent facades. Chancellor Vextar, the Zephyrian Prime representative, stood motionless as his subordinates arranged data tablets around him with mechanical precision. The session had been called under Emergency Protocol 7, which meant something significant had happened in one of the outer colonies. Sarah's stomach churned with unease. Emergency sessions rarely brought good news for humanity, and the fact that the Zephyrians had specifically requested this gathering made her even more concerned. Her species had only been part of the Galactic Council for 12 years, ever since first contact had revealed that Earth was far from alone in the universe. Those 12 years have been a constant struggle for legitimacy, respect, and basic survival rights. "The Council will come to order," announced Moderator Clixthon, a massive creature whose species had held the moderator position for over 3 centuries. His voice carried through the chamber's translation matrix, converting his native clicks and whistles into comprehensible speech for each species present. "We convene today under Emergency Protocol 7, at the request of the Zephyrian Collective. Chancellor Vextar, you may present your case." The crystalline being rose with fluid grace, his body catching the light in a way that seemed almost hypnotic. When he spoke, his voice carried the musical quality typical of his species, but there was an underlying hardness that Sarah had learned to associate with Zephyrian displeasure. "Esteemed council members," Vextar began, "I come before you today with grave concerns about the human colony on Kepler 442b. As you're all aware, this world was granted to humanity under the Colonial Expansion Act of 2157, despite significant reservations from several member species about their ability to properly govern themselves in accordance with galactic law." Sarah's jaw tightened. The Zephyrians never missed an opportunity to remind the Council that humanity's colonial rights had been hard-won and grudgingly granted. Kepler 442b, or Haven as the colonists called it, was humanity's 3rd successful colony world and home to nearly 2 million people. It was a testament to human ingenuity and determination carved out of an unforgiving landscape through sheer willpower and technological innovation. Our recent inspection of the Haven colony has revealed disturbing violations of the Universal Rights Charter, specifically regarding the treatment and containment of juvenile individuals, Vextar continued, his crystalline features somehow managing to convey smugness despite their alien structure. "We have documented evidence of systematic imprisonment of human children, denial of basic freedoms, and what can only be described as institutionalized abuse." The chamber erupted in murmurs and translated exclamations from various species. Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. What was Vextar talking about? She had been in regular communication with Governor Martinez on Haven just 2 weeks ago, and there had been no mention of any problems with child welfare. "These are serious accusations, Chancellor," Moderator Clixthon rumbled. "Please present your evidence to the Council." A holographic display materialized in the center of the chamber, showing aerial views of what was unmistakably the Haven colony. Sarah recognized the distinctive architecture of New Geneva, the colony's capital city, with its reinforced domes and connecting tunnels designed to protect against the planet's harsh weather patterns. The view zoomed in on a large complex on the outskirts of the city, surrounded by high walls and guard towers. "This facility," Vextar announced with theatrical gravity, "houses over 3,000 human juveniles in conditions that violate 17 separate articles of the Universal Rights Charter. The children are confined against their will, subjected to rigid schedules, denied freedom of movement, and forced to participate in what humans euphemistically call educational programs for up to 8 hours per day." Sarah's confusion deepened. The complex looked like a school, a very well-designed, state-of-the-art educational facility but definitely a school. She had reviewed the architectural plans herself when a colony council had requested funding for its construction. What was Vextar playing at? The hologram shifted to show interior corridors filled with human children moving between rooms. To Sarah's eyes, they looked happy and healthy, chatting with friends, carrying books and tablets, displaying all the normal behaviors of students between classes. But as she looked around the chamber, she could see that many of the alien representatives were viewing the scenes with expressions of horror and disgust. As you can see, Vextar pressed on, the children are herded through narrow corridors like livestock. They are segregated by age groups, forced into uniform clothing, and compelled to sit in rows while adults indoctrinate them with human cultural values. When they attempt to leave the facility, they are physically prevented from doing so by armed guards. Sarah realized with growing alarm what was happening. The Zephyrians, and likely several other species on the council, were deliberately mischaracterizing human education as imprisonment. In Zephyrian society, young ones learned through osmosis and neural sharing, absorbing knowledge directly from their elders without formal instruction. Many other species had similar approaches to education. The concept of compulsory schooling, of gathering children together for structured learning, was apparently so foreign to them that they viewed it as abuse. I object to this characterization, Sarah said, rising from her seat. What Chancellor Vextar is describing is a standard educational facility, not a prison. Human children require structured learning environments to develop properly. This is a fundamental aspect of our biology and culture. Culture is not an excuse for violation of universal rights, Vextar replied smoothly. The facts are clear. Human juveniles are being held against their will, denied the freedom to choose their own path, and subjected to mind-shaping techniques that would be illegal if applied to any other species. The Altarian representative, a being that resembled a cross between a praying mantis and a tree, clicked disapprovingly. The evidence is troubling. It transmitted through the translation matrix. In Altarian society, our young are free to explore and learn at their own pace from the moment they achieve mobility. This human practice of containment seems barbaric. It's not containment, Sarah protested. It's education. Human children don't learn through instinct or neural transfer like many of your species do. We require active instruction, practice, and guidance to develop the skills necessary for adult life. The facility you're seeing is designed to provide that guidance in a safe, nurturing environment. Nurturing? The hegemony representative, a blob-like creature that communicated through color changes across its translucent skin, pulsed with what the translation matrix interpreted as incredulity. We observed armed humans preventing juveniles from leaving the facility. How is imprisonment nurturing? Sarah took a deep breath, trying to maintain her diplomatic composure while fighting the urge to scream at the assembled aliens. Those aren't guards, they're safety personnel. Haven is a frontier world with dangerous wildlife and unstable weather patterns. The children are protected within the educational complex during learning hours, and they return to their families every evening. This is not imprisonment. It's responsible childcare. The human representative speaks of learning hours as if the restriction of freedom can be scheduled. Vextar observed with what sounded like satisfaction. This only confirms our assessment that humans treat their young as property to be controlled and manipulated rather than as individuals with inherent rights. The chamber filled with more murmurs and translated expressions of concern. Sarah could see that the narrative was getting away from her. The alien representatives were genuinely horrified by what they perceived as systematic child abuse, and her explanations were only making things worse. The fundamental differences between human child development and that of other species were creating a massive cultural misunderstanding with potentially catastrophic consequences. I request a formal investigation, she said, her voice carrying across the chamber. If the Council has concerns about human child-rearing practices on Haven, then send an objective investigative team. But I strongly object to these accusations being made based on incomplete information and cultural misunderstanding. Moderator Clixthon's massive head swiveled toward her. The request for investigation is noted. However, given the severity of the accusations and the evidence already presented, the Council must consider immediate protective measures for the affected juveniles. Sarah's blood ran cold. Protective measures? Removal of the children from the harmful environment, Vextar said, his crystalline features somehow managing to convey benevolent concern. The Zephyrian Collective volunteers to provide sanctuary for these victims of human abuse. We have facilities capable of housing and properly caring for 3,000 juveniles while a full investigation proceeds. Absolutely not, Sarah said, her diplomatic training finally abandoning her entirely. You are not removing human children from their families and their home based on a fundamental misunderstanding of human biology and culture. This is exactly the kind of heavy-handed interference that we've been fighting against since we joined this council. The moderator's tentacles writhed in what might have been irritation. Ambassador Chun, please control your emotional display. This is a formal council session. My emotional display? Sarah's voice rose despite her best efforts to remain calm. You're discussing the forcible removal of 3,000 children from their homes and families, and you're concerned about my emotional display? Let me be perfectly clear. Any attempt to remove human children from Haven will be met with the strongest possible resistance from Earth and all human colonies. Threats of violence are not appropriate in this chamber. The hegemony representative pulsed in alarming shades of red. I'm not threatening violence, Sarah replied, though she could feel her heart racing with adrenaline. I'm stating a fact. Human parents will not allow their children to be taken by aliens who don't understand the first thing about human development and child rearing. You want to see what human protective instincts look like? Try to take our children. The chamber erupted in chaos. Representatives from a dozen species began speaking at once, their words creating a cacophony that overwhelmed the translation matrix. Some seemed sympathetic to Sarah's position, while others appeared to view her passionate defense as confirmation of human irrationality and unfitness for galactic citizenship. Through the noise, Vexstar's musical voice cut like a crystal bell. The human response only confirms our assessment. Violence and emotional instability are clearly part of their species' approach to child rearing. These juveniles must be protected from such influences. Sarah realized that she was trapped in a nightmare of bureaucratic proportions. Every word she spoke in defense of human practices was being twisted to support the Zephyrians' case. The aliens' fundamental inability to understand human biology and development was creating a crisis that could destroy humanity's place in the galactic community and tear apart the lives of thousands of families. As the chaos continued around her, Sarah's mind raced through possible solutions. She needed to find a way to make the council understand that human children were not being abused or imprisoned, but were receiving the education and care they needed to grow into healthy adults. But how could she explain something as fundamental as human childhood to beings who had never experienced it? The answer came to her suddenly, and she stood up again, raising her voice above the tumult. I invoke Article 47 of the Universal Rights Charter, she announced. I demand a cultural education exchange before any decisions are made regarding human children. The chamber gradually quieted as the moderator's translation of her words reached each delegation. Article 47 was rarely invoked, but it guaranteed any member species the right to provide comprehensive cultural education to the council before decisions were made that could fundamentally impact their way of life. Article 47 requires unanimous council approval. Moderator Clixthon rumbled. Chancellor Vextar, do you consent to a cultural education exchange regarding human child development and education practices? Sarah held her breath as she watched the crystalline alien consider his response. If he refused, it would look like he was deliberately trying to avoid understanding human culture, which might damage his credibility with other council members. But if he agreed, it would give her time to mount a proper defense and perhaps find allies among the more reasonable species. The Zephyrian Collective agrees to this delay, Vextar said finally, but we maintain that no cultural practice can justify the violation of fundamental rights. The children on Haven remain at risk with every moment this session is prolonged. The cultural education exchange is approved, the moderator announced. This session will reconvene in 72 standard hours to receive the human presentation. In the meantime, the situation on Haven will remain under council observation, and no changes will be made to current arrangements without further deliberation. As the session adjourned and the various delegations began filing out of the chamber, Sarah remained seated, her mind already working through the monumental task ahead of her. She had 3 days to prepare a presentation that would explain the entirety of human child development, education, and family structure to beings who might not even have a concept of childhood as humans understood it. But as she watched Vextar's crystalline form gliding toward the exit, surrounded by his entourage of subordinates, she realized that her real challenge wouldn't be education. The Zephyrians weren't acting out of genuine concern for human children. This was a calculated political attack designed to undermine humanity's standing in the galactic community and possibly remove them from the colonial expansion program entirely. The question was, how far were they willing to go to achieve their goals? And, more importantly, how far would humanity go to protect their children from alien interference? As Sarah finally gathered her materials and headed for the exit, she made a mental note to contact Governor Martinez on Haven immediately. If the Zephyrians were planning something more dramatic than a council debate, the colonists needed to be prepared. Because despite her diplomatic training and commitment to peaceful solutions, she knew one thing with absolute certainty. No force in the galaxy would separate human parents from their children without a fight that would make the Council's emergency sessions look like polite tea parties. The real crisis, Sarah realized, was just beginning. The emergency communication from the Galactic Council reached Governor Elena Martinez while she was reviewing geological surveys in her office overlooking New Geneva's Central Plaza. The quantum transmitter's priority alert tone cut through the normal background hum of the colony's operations center, and Elena's stomach immediately knotted with dread. Priority communications from Earth, where the Council almost never brought good news. Ambassador Chen's face materialized in the holographic display, her usually composed features tight with stress and barely controlled anger. Elena, we have a major problem. The Zephyrians have accused the colony of systematic child abuse and want to remove all the children from Haven for their own protection. Elena stared at the transmission in disbelief. What? That's insane. What are they talking about? They're claiming that the Regional Education Center is a prison and that we're holding children against their will, Chun continued. I know how this sounds, but they've convinced at least half the council that human education practices constitute a violation of universal rights. I've bought us 72 hours with a cultural exchange presentation, but, Elena, you need to prepare for the possibility that they might try to take direct action. The transmission continued with Chun explaining the details of the council session, but Elena found herself staring out her office window at the education center in the distance. The facility was one of the colony's proudest achievements, a state-of-the-art complex that served children from 5 to 18 years old. It had been designed with input from Earth's best educational architects and child psychologists, specifically adapted for Haven's unique environmental challenges. Elena had fought for 2 years to get funding for the center, arguing that a proper educational facility was essential for the colony's long-term success. The children of Haven deserved the same opportunities as their Earth-born cousins, and the complex had delivered on that promise. Test scores consistently ranked in the top 10% galactically, and Haven's teenagers were already being accepted into prestigious universities throughout human space. Now the Zephyrians wanted to paint this achievement as child abuse. Miguel, Elena called to her chief of security, a weathered former Earth military officer who had requested transfer to Haven after his daughter was born. I need you to come in here immediately. Security Chief Miguel Santos appeared in her doorway within minutes, his expression serious. He had obviously caught enough of the transmission to understand that something major was developing. Governor, what's the situation? Sit down, Elena said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. The Zephyrians are accusing us of child abuse and want to remove all our children from the colony. They claim the education center is a prison. Miguel's weathered face went through several expressions in rapid succession. Confusion, disbelief, and, finally, a cold anger that Elena recognized from his military days. Ma'am, are you telling me that aliens want to take our kids away because they don't understand how schools work? That's exactly what I'm telling you, Elena replied. Ambassador Chun thinks this might be a deliberate political attack rather than genuine concern for child welfare. Either way, we need to be prepared for anything from council investigators to armed Zephyrian ships showing up in our system. Miguel stood up and began pacing, his hand unconsciously moving to where his sidearm would have been during his military service. Governor, with all due respect, no alien is taking children from this colony. I don't care what the Galactic Council says or what rights they claim to have. This is human territory. These are human kids, and any attempt to remove them will be met with extreme force. Elena had expected this reaction. Miguel had lost his wife in the Earth-Centauri border conflict 12 years earlier and had been fiercely protective of his daughter Carmen ever since. The idea of aliens forcibly removing human children would trigger every protective instinct he possessed. Miguel, I understand your feelings, but we need to think strategically here, Elena said carefully. If we resist council authority too directly, we could lose our colonial charter entirely. That would mean everyone on Haven, including the children, would have to return to Earth. Better Earth than some alien concentration camp, Miguel replied grimly. Governor, you have a 13-year-old daughter. How would you feel if the Zephyrians decided she needed to be protected from human child-rearing practices? The question hit Elena like a physical blow. Her daughter Sophia was currently in her advanced biology class at the Education Center, probably working on her project about Haven's unique ecosystem. The thought of crystalline aliens deciding that Sophia's education was abusive and forcibly removing her from the colony made Elena's vision go red around the edges. Point taken, Elena said through gritted teeth. But we still need to be smart about this. What's our defensive capability if the Zephyrians decide to take direct action? Miguel's expression became professionally calculating. Against a full Zephyrian intervention force? Not good. We have about 200 security personnel with light weapons, plus whatever the civilian population could contribute. The Education Center has basic lockdown protocols, but it wasn't designed to withstand a military assault. If they come with ships, we're basically defenseless. Elena activated her communication console and opened channels to several key department heads. Within minutes, her office was crowded with the colony's senior leadership. Dr. Patricia Williams, the Education Center's director, Colony Engineer James Kim, Agriculture Director Yuki Tanaka, and Medical Chief Dr. Samuel Okafor. Ladies and gentlemen, Elena began, we have a situation that threatens the fundamental existence of our community. The Galactic Council is considering forcible removal of our children based on Zephyrian accusations of child abuse. I need to know what our options are. Dr. Williams, a small woman in her 50s who had dedicated her life to childhood education, spoke first. This is absolutely ridiculous. The Education Center represents the best practices in human child development. Our children are happy, healthy, and thriving. The Zephyrians clearly don't understand the first thing about human biology or psychology. That may be true, Elena replied, but understanding and politics don't always coincide. Dr. Williams, I need you to prepare a comprehensive documentation package showing the educational outcomes, health records, and psychological assessments for every child in the center. We need irrefutable proof that our children are not being harmed. Engineer Kim cleared his throat. Governor, what about the possibility of evacuating the children to the outer settlements? Some of the mining camps and agricultural stations are pretty remote. It might buy us time to fight this through proper diplomatic channels. Elena considered the suggestion. Haven had 17 smaller settlements scattered across 2 continents, many of them in locations that would be difficult for outsiders to find or access. The children could potentially be hidden until the crisis passed, but the logistics would be nightmare, and it would mean separating families and disrupting the entire educational system. That's a last resort option, Elena decided. Moving 3,000 children and their families would be almost impossible to hide, and if the council discovered we were actively concealing the children, it would only confirm their suspicions that we're hiding abuse. Medical Chief Okafor, a tall Nigerian doctor who had been one of the colony's founding members, leaned forward in his chair. Governor, there's something we need to consider that goes beyond politics. Human children separated from their families and placed in alien care facilities would suffer severe psychological trauma. The developmental disruption alone could cause permanent damage. Explain, Elena said. Human children bond with their parents and communities in ways that other species might not understand, Dr. Okafor continued. Forced separation, especially by alien beings, could trigger massive stress responses. We're talking about potential developmental delays, attachment disorders, depression, and, in extreme cases, complete psychological breakdown. The Zephyrians think they're protecting our children, but they could actually cause irreparable harm. Elena felt a chill run down her spine. The medical implications alone were staggering. If the council proceeded with their plan, they wouldn't just be violating human rights. They would be inflicting genuine harm on the very children they claim to protect. I want that medical assessment in writing, Elena said. Full documentation of the psychological and developmental risks of forced family separation. If we're going to fight this, we need every weapon available. Security Chief Miguel had been listening quietly, but now he stepped forward. Governor, I've been thinking about defensive strategies. If the Zephyrians come with ships, we can't stop them directly. But we could make removal of the children extremely difficult and costly. How? Elena asked. Passive resistance, Miguel replied. Every family locks down their homes. Parents physically shield their children. The education center goes into full lockdown with the children and staff inside. Force the Zephyrians to use violence against peaceful human families if they want to take our kids. Make them show the entire galaxy what their protection actually looks like. The room fell silent as everyone considered the implications. Passive resistance could work from a public relations standpoint, but it would also put the children and families at risk if the Zephyrians decided to escalate their response. Dr. Williams broke the silence. There's another angle we should consider. What if we could prove that Zephyrian child-rearing practices are actually harmful to human children? Turn their argument around on them. Elena looked at her with interest. Explain. Zephyrian young develop through neural sharing and osmotic learning, Dr. Williams said. They don't have the extended childhood dependency period that humans require. If human children were placed in Zephyrian care facilities, they wouldn't receive the structured guidance, emotional support, and social interaction they need for healthy development. We could argue that Zephyrian protection would actually constitute abuse of human children. That's brilliant, Elena said. Dr. Okafor, can you work with Dr. Williams to document the specific ways that Zephyrian care would be harmful to human children? I want a complete physiological and psychological analysis. As the meeting continued, Elena's communication console chimed with an incoming priority transmission. The image that materialized showed Captain Jessica Rivera of the Earth Defense Force Cruiser Wellington, currently stationed at the edge of the Haven system. Governor Martinez, Captain Rivera said, her military bearing evident even through the holographic transmission. I've received priority orders from Earth Command regarding the situation with the Galactic Council. I'm authorized to provide any assistance necessary to protect human civilians on Haven. Elena felt a surge of relief. The Wellington was a modern cruiser with significant defensive capabilities. While it couldn't stand against a full Zephyrian fleet, its presence would at least give the aliens pause and demonstrate Earth's commitment to protecting the colony. Captain, what are your orders regarding Council authority? Elena asked. Ma'am, my orders are clear. I am to prevent any forcible removal of human civilians from Haven unless specifically authorized by Earth Command. The Galactic Council does not have jurisdiction over internal human family matters. Miguel grinned for the first time since the crisis began. Governor, it sounds like Earth is backing us up on this. Elena nodded, but she knew that the situation was still incredibly dangerous. If armed conflict broke out between human and Zephyrian forces, it could spiral into a full interstellar war. The Zephyrians had significantly more ships and resources than humanity, and they had allies among several other Council species. Captain Rivera, I want you to maintain a defensive posture, but avoid any actions that could be interpreted as aggressive. We're still hoping to resolve this through diplomatic channels, Elena said. Understood, Governor. Wellington will remain on station and ready to respond to any threats to Haven Colony. As the transmission ended, Elena looked around at the assembled leaders of her community. These people had come to Haven to build something better for humanity, to create a world where their children could grow up free from the conflicts and limitations of Earth. Now they were facing the possibility that their greatest achievement would be used against them. I want everyone to understand what we're facing here, Elena said. This isn't just about education or child welfare. The Zephyrians are trying to undermine human autonomy and independence within the galactic community. If they succeed in taking our children, they set a precedent that any human practice that differs from galactic norms can be declared abusive and subject to intervention. Dr. Williams nodded grimly. It's a slippery slope. Today, it's education. Tomorrow, it could be our family structures, our religious practices, or our entire way of life. Exactly, Elena replied, which is why we cannot allow this to succeed. But we also cannot let our response destroy everything we've built here. We need to be smart unified and absolutely determined to protect our children and our community. Engineer Kim raised his hand. Governor, what about involving the children themselves in the response? They're old enough to understand what's happening, and their own testimony about their experiences might be powerful evidence. Elena considered the suggestion. The older children at the education center were indeed mature enough to understand the situation, and their own voices defending their education and their families could be compelling evidence against the Zephyrian accusations. That's risky, Dr. Okafor warned. Involving children in an adult political conflict could cause additional stress and trauma. But these children are already involved, Dr. Williams pointed out. They're the ones being targeted by these accusations. Giving them a voice in their own defense might actually be empowering rather than traumatic. Elena made a decision. Dr. Williams, I want you to carefully brief the older students about what's happening. Get their perspectives on their education and their lives here. But make it clear that this is voluntary and that we're not asking them to bear the burden of adult political problems. As the meeting broke up and the department heads scattered to their various preparations, Elena remained in her office with Miguel, staring out at the education center where her daughter and 3,000 other children were going about their normal school day, unaware that their entire world was under threat. Miguel, I need you to be honest with me, Elena said quietly. If push comes to shove, if the Zephyrians actually show up with ships and demand our children, what are the chances we can stop them? Miguel was quiet for a long moment, his weathered face grave. Governor, in a straight military confrontation, we'd lose. But military confrontations aren't always won by the side with the most firepower. They're won by the side with the most to lose, and the strongest will to fight. And we have the most to lose? Ma'am, they want to take our children. Human parents don't surrender their children. Not to anyone. Not under any circumstances. If the Zephyrians want them, they're going to have to go through every parent, every teacher, every adult in this colony. And that's a fight they might not be prepared for. Elena nodded slowly. She hoped it wouldn't come to that. Hoped that Ambassador Chin's diplomatic efforts would find a peaceful solution. But as she watched children playing in the education center's courtyard through her window, she knew that Miguel was right. If peaceful solutions failed, the aliens would discover exactly how far humans were willing to go to protect their young. The question was, would the galaxy be ready for that revelation? The Galactic Council's emergency session reconvened exactly 72 hours after Ambassador Sarah Chun had invoked Article 47, but the chamber's atmosphere had changed dramatically. Word of the human colony crisis had spread throughout the galactic community, and representatives from dozens of species had requested observer status. The normally spacious chamber felt cramped as beings of every conceivable shape and size crowded into whatever space they could find. Sarah stood at the central presentation podium, acutely aware that the next few hours would determine not just the fate of the children on Haven, but humanity's entire future within the galactic community. Behind her, a massive holographic display system waited to project her carefully prepared presentation to the assembled aliens. In her hands, she held data tablets containing 12 years of research into comparative child development across known sapient species. Chancellor Vextar occupied his delegation's platform with even more crystalline subordinates than usual. His translucent features remained impassive, but Sarah had learned to read the subtle color shifts that indicated Zephyrian emotional states. The faint amber tinge to his prismatic form suggested anticipation, perhaps even excitement. He was clearly confident that no human presentation could overcome the evidence he had already presented. The Council recognizes Ambassador Chun of the Human Federation. Moderator Clixton announced. You have been granted 4 standard hours to present your cultural education exchange regarding human child development and educational practices. Sarah activated the holographic display, and the chamber filled with images of human children throughout history. Cave paintings depicting families, Egyptian art showing children at play, Renaissance paintings of mother and child, and, finally, modern photographs of children in classrooms around the galaxy. Honored council members, Sarah began. Today I ask you to undertake a journey through the evolution of human consciousness and development. What you will learn may challenge your assumptions about childhood, education, and the very nature of sapient development. The first section of her presentation focused on human neurological development, comparing brain scans of human children with those of adult humans, and with the equivalent development patterns of other known species. The differences were stark and immediate. Unlike many species represented in this council, humans are born in an extremely underdeveloped state, Sarah explained as the hologram showed comparative brain development charts. A newborn human has only 25% of its adult brain development complete. This is unique among sapient species. Zephyrians, for example, emerge from their crystalline matrices with 70% brain development. Altarians achieve 80% development before leaving the nursery pods. She could see some of the alien representatives leaning forward with interest. This was clearly information many of them had never considered. This extended developmental period means that human children require active guidance, structured learning experiences, and protective environments for far longer than the young of other species. What Chancellor Vextar characterized as imprisonment is actually a biological necessity. The hologram shifted to show time-lapse brain scans of human children from birth to adulthood, highlighting the dramatic changes in neural structure and connectivity that occurred during the educational years. The human brain continues developing until approximately age 25, Sarah continued. During this period, structured educational experiences literally shape the physical structure of the brain. The neurons that will determine a human's intellectual capabilities, emotional regulation, and social skills are formed through guided learning experiences. An interruption came from the hegemony representative, whose blob-like form pulsed with skeptical colors. This extended dependency seems inefficient. Why would evolution produce such a disadvantaged offspring pattern? Sarah had anticipated this question. Because, honored representative, this extended development period is what makes humans capable of exceptional adaptability and creativity. While other species inherit most of their knowledge and behavioral patterns, humans can adapt to virtually any environment or challenge through learned responses. She gestured to the hologram, which now showed human colonies on dozens of worlds with vastly different environmental conditions. This is why humans have successfully established colonies on worlds that would be impossible for most species to inhabit. The same neurological flexibility that requires extended childhood education also allows us to thrive in conditions that would kill other sapient beings. Chancellor Vextar's crystalline form shifted, the amber tinge deepening to orange. The human representative attempts to justify abuse through appeals to evolutionary advantage. The fact remains that children are being held against their will and denied freedom of choice. That brings me to the second part of my presentation, Sarah replied smoothly. The concept of freedom of choice itself varies dramatically between species based on neurological development patterns. The hologram now displayed brain scans showing decision-making centers in various species. Zephyrian young achieve adult decision-making capacity within 6 months of emergence. Altarian young develop full risk assessment capabilities within 1 standard year. Human children do not develop complete decision-making capabilities until their early 20s. She paused to let this information sink in. The areas of the human brain responsible for long-term planning, risk assessment, and consequence evaluation are among the last to develop. This is why human societies have evolved protective structures around childhood. Without guidance and boundaries, human children would literally make decisions that could kill them. To demonstrate her point, Sarah activated a simulation showing decision trees. If given complete freedom of choice, a 5-year-old human might choose to eat only candy, never sleep, and play with dangerous objects. A 10-year-old might decide that education is unnecessary and spend all their time in entertainment. A 15-year-old might engage in high-risk behaviors without understanding the long-term consequences. The Altarian representative's insect-like head tilted curiously. Are you suggesting the human young are incapable of rational thought? Not incapable, Sarah clarified, but operating with incomplete neural hardware. Imagine trying to run advanced computational programs on a system that's only partially constructed. The basic functions work, but complex operations are unreliable. She activated another section of the presentation showing psychological studies. Human children actually benefit from structured environments that provide clear boundaries and expectations. Studies consistently show that children in well-organized educational settings show lower stress levels, better emotional regulation, and higher long-term satisfaction than children left to their own devices. This is precisely the kind of conditioning propaganda we would expect from a species that practices systematic juvenile oppression. Vextar interjected, his crystalline form now pulsing with hostile red highlights. These so-called studies could easily be manipulated to support abusive practices. Sarah felt her temper flare, but forced herself to remain calm. Then, perhaps we should examine what happens when human children are placed in inappropriate care situations. The hologram shifted to display medical and psychological data. These are the documented results when human children are separated from their families and cultural educational systems. Severe depression, developmental delays, attachment disorders, and in extreme cases, complete psychological breakdown. Dr. Okafor's medical research from Haven had been invaluable in preparing this section. The data was stark and undeniable. Human children removed from their natural development environment suffered measurable harm. Furthermore, Sarah continued, different species have fundamentally incompatible approaches to child development. Zephyrian osmotic learning, while appropriate for crystalline neural networks, would leave human children without the structured skill building they require. Hegemony collective consciousness sharing could cause permanent psychological damage to individual-oriented human minds. The chamber began buzzing with translated conversations as various representatives discussed these revelations among themselves. Sarah could see that her presentation was having an impact, but she wasn't sure if it was enough to overcome the political motivations behind the Zephyrians' accusations. I now invite the council to observe actual human educational practices in operation, Sarah announced. The hologram connected to a live feed from the Haven Education Center, where Dr. Williams had arranged for normal classes to continue while being transmitted to the council. The aliens watched as human children engaged in various learning activities, science experiments, artistic projects, athletic activities, and social interaction. What you're observing is not imprisonment or abuse, Sarah explained. These children are engaged in age-appropriate learning activities designed to develop their neural pathways, social skills, and intellectual capabilities. Notice their body language, their expressions, their interactions with each other, and with their teachers. The feed showed children laughing during a physics demonstration, collaborating on an art project, and enthusiastically participating in a history discussion. To human eyes, it was obviously a positive, nurturing environment. But Sarah could see some of the alien representatives still viewing the scenes with suspicion. The children appear content, admitted the hegemony representative, but contentment can be induced through psychological manipulation. How do we know this is genuine satisfaction rather than learned compliance? Sarah smiled. An excellent question. Dr. Williams, please initiate interview protocol 7. On the live feed, Dr. Williams approached a group of older students and asked if they would be willing to speak directly to the Galactic Council about their experiences. The students' faces lit up with excitement and curiosity. Several immediately volunteered, and within minutes, a 16-year-old girl named Lisa Martinez was addressing the council directly through the transmission link. "Hello," Lisa said, waving at the holographic display that showed her the council chamber. "I'm Lisa, and I'm a junior at the Haven Regional Education Center. Dr. Williams told us that some people think our school is like a prison, and we all thought that was really funny because we love coming here." Sarah watched the alien representatives closely as Lisa spoke naturally and enthusiastically about her education, her friends, her plans for the future, and her gratitude for the opportunities the Education Center provided. Several other students joined the conversation, each one articulating their positive experiences with confidence and genuine emotion. "These young humans seem remarkably articulate," observed the Altarian representative. "That's one of the benefits of structured human education," Sarah replied. "These students have developed communication skills, critical thinking abilities, and social confidence that will serve them throughout their lives. This is what proper human child development produces." Chancellor Vextar had remained silent during the student interviews, but now his crystalline form pulsed with agitation. Coached responses from selected individuals proved nothing. The fundamental issue remains. These juveniles are denied freedom of movement and choice. Sarah decided it was time to address the political motivation behind the accusations directly. "Chancellor Vextar, I noticed that the Zephyrian Collective has never expressed concern about child welfare practices among other council species. Why this sudden interest in human children?" The crystalline being's form flared with bright warning colors. "The collective acts only in the interest of universal rights and justice. Really, Sarah activated another section of her presentation. Because according to council records, the Zephyrian Collective has opposed every human colonial expansion proposal, voted against human membership in 3 separate trade agreements, and consistently argued that humans are unfit for full council membership. The chamber erupted in murmurs as the data displayed showed a clear pattern of Zephyrian opposition to human interests over the past 12 years. Is it possible, Sarah continued, that these accusations of child abuse are actually part of a pattern of systematic discrimination against humanity? That the collective is using manufactured outrage about misunderstood cultural practices to attack human sovereignty and colonial rights? Vextar's crystalline form now blazed with angry red light. The human representative attempts to deflect legitimate concerns with baseless accusations of political motivation. Baseless? Sarah smiled grimly. Then, perhaps Chancellor Vextar can explain why the collective waited until after the successful completion of Haven's 5th-year colonial review to raise these concerns. Surely if genuine child abuse was occurring, it would have been discovered during any of the previous council inspections. She could see that her counterattack was having an effect. Several representatives were now looking at Vextar with obvious suspicion, and the moderator's massive form was shifting in what might have been growing irritation with the Zephyrians' tactics. Furthermore, Sarah pressed her advantage. I formally request that the council examine Zephyrian cultural practices regarding the treatment of developing young. Specifically, their practice of isolating emergent individuals in crystalline matrices for extended periods without social contact or external stimulation. The chamber fell silent. Sarah was essentially turning the Zephyrians' own tactics against them, questioning whether their development practices might be considered abusive by other species standards. Vextar's response was immediate and hostile. Zephyrian development practices are time-tested and appropriate for our species' needs. This deflection does not address the clear evidence of human juvenile abuse. And human educational practices are time-tested and appropriate for our species' needs, Sarah replied. The difference is that humans don't go around demanding that other species abandon their cultural practices and surrender their children to our care. Moderator Clixton's massive tentacles writhed with what was definitely irritation. This debate is becoming unproductive. Ambassador Chun, please summarize your position for council consideration. Sarah took a deep breath and prepared her closing argument. Honored council members, the evidence is clear. Human children are not being abused or imprisoned. They are receiving the structured education and protective care that their species requires for healthy development. The real question before this council is whether we will allow political prejudice to override scientific fact and cultural understanding. She gestured to the holographic display, which now showed images of happy, healthy children from throughout human space. These children represent humanity's future. They are growing up to become scientists, artists, engineers, doctors, and leaders who will contribute to the galactic community. The Zephyrian proposal to remove them from their families and educational environment would cause genuine harm while serving no legitimate purpose except political advantage. Sarah paused for effect. I ask this council, are we here to protect children or to attack humanity? Because you cannot do both. As Sarah returned to her seat, the chamber buzzed with intense discussion among the various delegations. She had presented the strongest possible case for human practices, but she knew that politics and prejudice could still override facts and evidence. The next few hours would determine whether reason or political ambition would prevail. But as she looked at the live feed, still showing children happily engage in their education on Haven, Sarah felt a grim determination settle over her. If the council voted to proceed with the Zephyrian proposal, they would discover that humans took the protection of their children very seriously indeed. The debate was far from over, and the stakes could not be higher. The council chamber had been in heated debate for 6 hours since Sarah's presentation ended. What began as formal deliberations had devolved into something approaching chaos as species after species weighed in on the human child welfare issue. Translation matrices struggled to keep up with the overlapping conversations, creating a cacophony of clicks, hums, musical tones, and color displays that would have been overwhelming to human senses. Sarah sat in the human delegation area, fighting exhaustion and growing dread as she listened to the various arguments. While her presentation had clearly swayed some representatives, the fundamental divisions were becoming more apparent with each speaker. Species with extended childhood development periods generally supported the human position, while those with rapid maturation cycles seemed more sympathetic to Zephyrian concerns. The political landscape was more complex than she had initially realized. The Zephyrians had built a coalition that included not just species that genuinely misunderstood human development, but also several that saw an opportunity to limit human expansion and influence within the galactic community. The economics of colonial expansion, trade route control, and resource allocation were all factors in what was supposedly a child welfare debate. Moderator Clixthon finally called for order after a particularly heated exchange between the hegemony representative and a coalition of smaller species. The Council will now hear final position statements from the primary parties. Chancellor Vextar, you may present your concluding argument. The Zephyrian leader rose with characteristic grace, his crystalline form now displaying the calm blue tones that indicated confidence and resolve. Honored Council members, despite the human representative's attempts to obscure the issue with cultural relativism and political accusations, the fundamental facts remain unchanged. The Chamber's holographic display activated under Vextar's control, showing the same footage of the Haven Education Center that had started this crisis. 3,000 human juveniles are being held against their will, denied freedom of movement, and subjected to systematic indoctrination. The humans claim this is necessary for their species development, but necessity does not excuse violation of universal rights. His argument was skillfully constructed, acknowledging the biological differences Sarah had presented while maintaining that universal rights transcended cultural practices. If we accept that biology justifies the restriction of juvenile freedom, we create a precedent that could be used to justify any form of oppression. Today, it is human education. Tomorrow, it could be Centaurian labor practices or vegan reproductive controls. Sarah felt her heart sink as she watched several representatives nod in agreement. Vextar was effectively turning her own arguments about cultural understanding into a weapon against human practices. The Zephyrian Collective maintains that protection of the vulnerable must take precedence over cultural accommodation. Vextar continued. These human children deserve the same freedoms enjoyed by young beings throughout the galaxy. We offer them sanctuary, education appropriate to their development level, and, most importantly, the freedom to choose their own paths. The crystalline being paused dramatically. The humans speak of protective instincts, but protection that denies freedom is not protection at all. It is control disguised as care. As Vextar returned to his delegation's platform, Sarah could see the impact of his words on the assembled representatives. He had successfully reframed the debate from one of cultural understanding to one of fundamental rights, and several species that had seemed sympathetic to humanity were now looking uncertain. Ambassador Chun, moderator Clixthon rumbled, please present humanity's final position. Sarah stood slowly, her mind racing through possible approaches. Vextar had taken the moral high ground by appealing to universal rights, but she suspected that his real motivations were far less noble. The question was whether she could expose those motivations without appearing desperate or defensive. Honored Council members, she began. Chancellor Vextar speaks eloquently of universal rights and protection of the vulnerable. But I must ask, where was this concern for vulnerable children when the Regelian Confederation was facing the juvenile plague crisis 3 years ago? Where was Zephyrian offer of sanctuary when the Andromedan colonies were struggling with educational resource shortages? She activated the holographic display to show Council records of various humanitarian crises over the past decade. In fact, according to official records, the Zephyrian Collective has never offered assistance to alien children in crisis. This sudden concern for human children is unprecedented in their diplomatic history. The chamber grew quiet as representatives examined the data Sarah was presenting. The pattern was clear. The Zephyrians had never shown interest in alien child welfare until it became a tool to attack human sovereignty. Furthermore, Sarah continued, I invite the Council to examine the timing of these accusations. The Zephyrian inspection of Haven Colony occurred just 2 weeks after the Council approved humanity's application for expanded colonial rights in the Tau Ceti sector. Is it coincidence that these child welfare concerns emerged precisely when human expansion threatened Zephyrian economic interests in that region? She could see Vextar's crystalline form flaring with angry red highlights, but He remained seated, unable to interrupt her final statement. The real question before this council is not whether human children are being harmed, Sarah said, her voice carrying clearly through the translation matrix. The medical evidence, psychological assessments, and the children's own testimony have proven that they are healthy, happy, and thriving. The real question is whether we will allow manufactured crises to be used as weapons of political warfare. Sarah gestured toward the Zephyrian delegation. Chancellor Vextar wants this council to forcibly remove 3,000 children from their homes and families based on a deliberate mischaracterization of normal educational practices. He wants you to traumatize human families and damage human children in the name of protection. Ask yourselves, who benefits from this action? The chamber erupted in murmurs and agitated discussions. Sarah could see that her counterattack was having an effect, but she wasn't finished. I call upon this council to reject the Zephyrian proposal, not just because it is based on false premises, but because accepting it would set a catastrophic precedent. If cultural practices can be declared abusive based on superficial misunderstanding and political motivation, then no species is safe from having their children taken by aliens who claim to know better. Sarah's voice rose with genuine emotion. Today, it is human education. Tomorrow, it could be Altarian coming-of-age rituals, hegemony collective learning experiences, or any other practice that seems strange to outside observers. The principle at stake here is whether parents have a right to raise their own children according to their species' biological and cultural needs. She paused, looking directly at each major delegation in turn. The humans ask for nothing more than the right to educate our children as our biology and culture require. We offer to work with any council committee to ensure that our practices meet appropriate standards of child welfare. But we will never, under any circumstances, surrender our children to aliens who view our most basic parenting practices as abuse. As Sarah returned to her seat, the chamber fell into an uneasy silence. Both sides had presented their cases, and now the council had to decide between competing visions of child protection, cultural sovereignty, and universal rights. Moderator Clixton's massive form shifted as he consulted with the council's administrative staff. The council will now proceed to preliminary voting. Each delegation will indicate their initial position for record purposes, followed by formal debate and final voting. The preliminary vote proceeded through the species alphabetically. Sarah kept a running tally as each delegation announced their position, and the results were closer than she had feared, but not as good as she had hoped. 23 species supported the Zephyrian proposal to remove the children, 21 opposed it, and 3 declared themselves undecided pending further deliberation. The narrow margin meant that any of the undecided species could tip the final vote, and Sarah knew that the next few hours of lobbying and negotiation would be crucial. But as she looked around the chamber, she also realized that regardless of the vote outcome, the damage to human-alien relations might be irreparable. Just as moderator Clixton was about to call for recess to allow for delegation consultations, an alarm tone echoed through the chamber. Emergency communications took precedence over all council business, and every representative turned their attention to the massive display screen that materialized above the central podium. The face that appeared belonged to Captain Jessica Rivera of the Earth Defense Force Cruiser Wellington. Her expression was grim, and Sarah immediately knew that the situation on Haven had taken a dramatic turn. Galactic Council Emergency Protocol, Captain Rivera announced. This is Captain Rivera of the EDF Wellington, currently stationed in the Haven system. I am reporting an unprovoked attack on human civilian facilities by unknown vessels. The chamber exploded into chaos as representatives from dozens of species began speaking at once. Through the noise, Captain Rivera continued her report. At 14:30 system time, 3 unidentified ships approached Haven Colony and attempted to deploy armed boarding parties at the Regional Education Center. The ships ignored all communication attempts and opened fire when colonial security attempted to interdict. I am declaring the Haven system under military protection and requesting immediate council intervention. Sarah felt her blood turn to ice. Someone had actually attacked the education center while the council was still debating. The children she had been fighting to protect were now in immediate physical danger. Chancellor Vextar rose from his platform, his crystalline form blazing with what might have been outrage or excitement. The Zephyrian Collective categorically denies any involvement in aggressive actions against human civilians. This apparent false flag operation is clearly designed to influence council voting through emotional manipulation. False flag. Captain Rivera's voice cut through the chamber's translation matrix like a blade. I have 3 damaged Zephyrian attack craft in custody and approximately 50 Zephyrian military personnel who were attempting to forcibly enter a facility containing human children. How exactly is that a false flag operation? The chamber fell into stunned silence. The Zephyrians had actually sent military forces to take the children by force, even while the council was still deliberating. The political implications were staggering. Moderator Clixthon's massive form writhed with what was clearly extreme agitation. Chancellor Vextar explained these accusations immediately. Vextar's crystalline features had gone completely white, the color of extreme stress in Zephyrian physiology. The collective has no knowledge of any military action in the Haven system. These accusations are completely fabricated. Captain Rivera, Sarah called out, can you provide visual confirmation of the attacking vessels? Affirmative, Ambassador Rivera replied. Transmitting visual records now. The chamber's holographic display filled with footage from the Wellington sensors, showing 3 sleek Zephyrian assault craft approaching Haven's orbital space. The ships bore the distinctive crystalline hull construction and energy signatures that were unmistakably Zephyrian in origin. The footage continued, showing the alien ships deploying what were clearly military boarding pods toward the education center's location. When colonial security vessels moved to intercept, the Zephyrians opened fire with advanced energy weapons. The attack was repelled with minimal casualties, Captain Rivera continued. However, it is clear that someone was attempting to forcibly remove human children from Haven Colony through military action. The timing, given the current council deliberations, suggests coordination with the political efforts we've been witnessing. Sarah looked across the chamber at Vextar, whose crystalline form was now cycling through stress colors so rapidly that it was almost strobing. Either the Zephyrian Chancellor had completely lost control of his military forces, or he had been caught in a catastrophic miscalculation. I demand an immediate investigation, Vextar declared, his musical voice now harsh with what might have been panic. If Zephyrian vessels were involved in this incident, it was without the knowledge or approval of the collective leadership. Moderator Clixthon's tentacles lashed with obvious anger. Chancellor Vextar, pending full investigation of this incident, the Council suspends all deliberations regarding the human colony matter. Additionally, the Zephyrian delegation is hereby placed under formal review for possible violation of Council non-aggression protocols. As the emergency session devolved into accusations, demands for investigation, and calls for sanctions against the Zephyrians, Sarah realized that the crisis had taken an unexpected turn. The attack on Haven had exposed the real motivations behind the child welfare accusations and potentially saved the children from forced removal. But it had also demonstrated just how far some aliens were willing to go to strike at humanity's growing influence in the galaxy. The battle for the children of Haven was over, but Sarah suspected that a much larger conflict was just beginning. The question now was whether humanity was prepared for the kind of enemies they had apparently made among the stars. 3 months after the attack on Haven, Ambassador Sarah Chun stood in the observation deck of the Earth Defense Force flagship Resolute, watching his construction crews put the finishing touches on the most advanced defensive platform humanity had ever built. The station, officially designated Haven Defense Platform Alpha, but already known throughout human space as the Guardian, represented a fundamental shift in humanity's approach to galactic relations. The events following the Zephyrian military assault had unfolded with stunning rapidity. Within hours of Captain Rivera's emergency broadcast, Council investigators had descended on the Haven system with unprecedented speed and authority. The evidence they uncovered painted a picture of coordinated political and military action designed to humiliate humanity and undermine their colonial rights through manufactured crisis. The captured Zephyrian personnel, when subjected to neural truth verification, revealed that the attack had been planned for weeks in coordination with the diplomatic accusations. The strategy was elegant in its cynicism. Use cultural misunderstanding to justify intervention, then claim that human resistance to child protection necessitated military action. The children would be removed for their own safety. The colony would be placed under council oversight, and humanity's expansion into the Tau Ceti sector would be blocked indefinitely. What the Zephyrians hadn't counted on was being caught so definitively. The neural verification testimony, combined with communication intercepts and financial records, had exposed not just the attack plan, but an entire network of anti-human sentiment within the galactic community. Several species had been providing intelligence and support for Zephyrian efforts to limit human expansion, driven by economic concerns and simple xenophobia. Sarah turned away from the observation window as footsteps approached behind her. Governor Elena Martinez of Haven Colony walked up to join her, carrying 2 cups of what had become the unofficial beverage of human diplomatic victory, Earth coffee, now served in council facilities throughout the galaxy as a symbol of humanity's growing cultural influence. "Penny for your thoughts," Elena said, offering Sarah one of the cups. "Just remembering how close we came to losing everything," Sarah replied, accepting the coffee gratefully. If that attack hadn't been so poorly timed, if the Zephyrians had been more patient, they might have actually pulled it off. Elena nodded grimly. The investigation results were terrifying to read. They had detailed plans for removing not just our children, but essentially dismantling human colonial independence entirely. The child welfare issue was just the opening move. The investigation had indeed revealed a comprehensive strategy targeting human expansion. The plan involved using various cultural and legal pretexts to justify increasing council oversight of human colonies, gradually eroding human autonomy until Earth's expansion into space could be effectively controlled by alien bureaucrats. The children of Haven had been intended as proof that humans couldn't be trusted to govern themselves properly. "What's the latest from the council?" Elena asked. Sarah smiled for the first time in months. Complete vindication. The council formally condemned the attack, expelled the Zephyrian delegation pending criminal proceedings, and passed Resolution 847 establishing the principle of cultural sovereignty in child-rearing practices. No species can be forced to abandon their cultural practices regarding their own young based solely on the standards of other species. The resolution was more than just a victory for humanity. It established protections for all species against the kind of cultural imperialism that the Zephyrians had attempted. Several smaller species had already expressed gratitude for human efforts to establish these protections, leading to new alliances and trade agreements that were strengthening humanity's position considerably. More importantly, Sarah continued, the Council approved our proposal for expanded human self-defense rights. We're no longer limited to light defensive forces in our colonies. The Guardian platform is just the beginning. Elena looked out at the massive defensive station with satisfaction. The platform mounted the most advanced human military technology, including weapons systems that had previously been restricted under galactic non-proliferation treaties. The attack on Haven had changed the rules of engagement, and humanity was taking full advantage of the new situation. "How are the children handling everything?" Sarah asked. "Better than expected," Elena replied. "The older students especially have been remarkably resilient. Many of them are saying the experience made them more determined to pursue careers in diplomacy, law, and interstellar relations. Lisa Martinez told me she wants to be an ambassador like you." The irony wasn't lost on either of them. The Zephyrian attempt to traumatize human children had instead inspired a generation of young humans to engage more deeply with galactic affairs. The education center that had been characterized as a prison was now producing some of the most motivated and internationally minded students in human space. "There's been an interesting development from Earth," Sarah said. "The Colonial Expansion Authority has fast-tracked approval for 12 new human colonies, specifically in regions where we'll be neighbors to species that supported us during the crisis. It seems our ordeal has actually accelerated human expansion rather than limiting it." Elena grinned. "I love cosmic justice. The Zephyrians tried to stop our expansion and ended up causing a boom in human colonization." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Captain Rivera, now wearing the insignia of Rear Admiral after her handling of the Haven crisis had earned her rapid promotion. Her expression was serious, but not alarmed, the look of someone with important news rather than a crisis to report. "Ambassador, Governor," Admiral Rivera said, nodding to each of them. "I wanted to update you on the latest intelligence from the Zephyrian home system. It's interesting news." "Good interesting or bad interesting?" Elena asked. "Definitely good," Rivera replied. "The exposure of their attack plan has triggered massive internal political upheaval within the Zephyrian collective. Chancellor Vextar has been removed from power, and approximately 40% of their leadership structure has been replaced. The new government has formally apologized for the attack and requested negotiations to repair relations with humanity. Sarah raised an eyebrow. Apologized? The Zephyrians? It gets better, Rivera continued. They've also offered reparations for the attack, including full funding for advanced defensive systems for all human colonies and preferential trade status for human goods in Zephyrian markets. Their new leadership apparently realizes that making enemies of humans was a strategic mistake. The transformation was remarkable, but not surprising. The galactic community respected strength and competence, and humanity's handling of the Haven crisis had demonstrated both qualities in abundance. The human diplomatic response had been measured, but firm. The military response had been effective, but not excessive, and the political aftermath had been skillfully managed to maximize long-term advantages. What about our other galactic relationships? Elena asked. Sarah's expression brightened considerably. That's the best news of all. 16 species have formally requested closer ties with humanity since the crisis. The Altarians want to establish joint research facilities. The hegemony has proposed a mutual defense pact. Even some species that were neutral before are now actively courting human friendship. The Haven crisis had served as an unexpected demonstration of human character and capabilities. Other species had watched as humans defended their children and their principles against overwhelming odds, then handled victory with grace and wisdom rather than vengeance. The combination of strength and restraint had impressed many galactic powers who had previously viewed humanity as inexperienced newcomers. Admiral Rivera cleared her throat. There's one more piece of news you should know about. Earth Command has decided to name the new heavy cruiser currently under construction after Haven Colony. The ship will carry a full diplomatic suite and will be tasked with protecting human interests throughout the galaxy. Elena looked moved. The EDF Resolute was impressive enough. Now we get our own ship. More than one ship, Rivera clarified. The success of human defensive operations has led to a massive increase in military funding. We're building an entire fleet designed specifically for protecting human colonies and interests. The galaxy has learned that attacking human children has consequences. As the three women stood on the observation deck watching the final construction work on the Guardian platform, Sarah reflected on how dramatically the situation had changed. 3 months ago, humanity had been fighting for the right to educate their own children. Now, they were expanding faster than ever before, building military forces that commanded respect throughout the galaxy, and establishing diplomatic relationships that would secure human interests for generations. The children of Haven were back in their classrooms, learning and growing in the protected environment their biology required. But now those classrooms were defended by advanced military technology, their education was protected by galactic law, and their futures were secured by human strength and determination. You know what the most satisfying part of all this is? Elena said suddenly. What? Sarah asked. Those Zephyrian attack craft that Captain Rivera captured, they've been converted into supplementary classroom modules for the education center. Every day, our children learn their lessons in what used to be enemy ships. They're literally turning weapons meant to harm them into tools for their education. Sarah laughed, the sound echoing across the observation deck. It was perfect poetic justice, and exactly the kind of creative solution that made humans such successful colonists. They took whatever challenges the galaxy threw at them and found ways to turn obstacles into advantages. Admiral, Sarah said, turning to Rivera, what's the current threat assessment for human space? Minimal, Rivera replied with satisfaction. The Guardian platform, combined with our expanded fleet and new defensive agreements, makes any direct attack on human colonies extremely unlikely. More importantly, the political cost of targeting humans has increased dramatically. No species wants to face the kind of investigation and sanctions that hit the Zephyrians. The transformation was complete. In 3 months, humanity had gone from being potential victims of alien interference to being one of the most respected and influential species in the galactic community. The attempt to traumatize human children had instead forged humanity into a stronger, more unified, and more capable civilization. As the three women prepared to leave the observation deck, Sarah took one last look at the Guardian platform. The massive station represented more than just military defense. It was a symbol of what happened when someone threatened human children. Every species in the galaxy would see that platform and remember that humans protected their young with technology, determination, and an absolute refusal to surrender their families to alien control. Ambassador, Elena said as they walked toward the transport bay, I've been thinking about a proposal for the education center. We want to establish a new curriculum track focused on interstellar relations and galactic diplomacy. After everything that's happened, our children deserve to understand the universe they're growing up in. Sarah nodded approvingly. That's an excellent idea. And I know exactly who should help design that curriculum. Ooh, the students themselves, Sarah replied. They've experienced galactic politics firsthand in ways that most adults never will. Their perspectives on interspecies relations and cultural understanding could be invaluable. As their transport departed the Guardian platform and headed toward Haven Colony, Sarah looked out at the stars that no longer seemed quite so alien or threatening. Humanity had found its place among those stars, not through conquest or submission, but through the simple act of protecting their children and defending their right to raise them according to human needs and human wisdom. The galaxy had tried to take human children away from their families and their education. Instead, it had created a generation of humans who understood both the challenges and opportunities of interstellar civilization, defended by the most advanced military technology humanity had ever built, and supported by allies who had learned to respect human strength and determination. The children of Haven were safe, humanity was stronger than ever, and the galaxy had learned a lesson it would not soon forget. You don't threaten human children without facing consequences that will echo across the stars for generations to come. In the end, the attempt to destroy humanity's future had only made it brighter.